Hello, my name is David Biffert. I would like to present the topic of industrialization, colonialism, and indigenous lifeways. Sustenance use and sustainability versus accumulation and exploitation. Therefore, considering North American First Peoples, having a focus on First Nations in British Columbia, Canada, this presentation will briefly explore the ongoing effects of colonialism in the light of what industrialization has done to the Earth's ecosystems, including its resources, the landscape, the population of animals and their habitats, and its ability for continued sustainability under the present and ongoing industrialized world system. I would like to present these ideas in three parts. To begin, part one will demonstrate that capitalism, which is inherently tied to colonialism, had fueled the Industrial Revolution, although the both are reciprocal one to the other. This in turn would lead to an exponential increase in industrialization worldwide, which eventually led to the destructive effects on the environment and ecosystems we see today on a global scale. The second part will describe the actual effects industrialization has had on these ecosystems and the lifeways of Indigenous peoples. I would finally like to demonstrate that Indigenous lifeways were superior to the industrialized, capitalist-driven colonizing states. Also, had Europeans developed an ecologically driven society, a society based on sustenance, use, and sustainability, rather than an economically driven society based on accumulation and exploitation, it is very plausible that colonialism may never have happened. The world we live in today would most likely look very much different. I would now like to introduce the first part of our topic, colonialism and industrialization, which both consequently feed into one another. You may like to view the two above images and decide where you would prefer to live if given the choice. Although volumes can be written on this subject alone, I would like to focus on some key points relative to this discussion. Capitalism, industrialization, and imperialist colonialism are intertwined and cannot be simply separated into individual parts, although one may wish to do so. Industry demands increased capital, but to increase capital, raw materials are needed to fuel the ever-increasing demands of industry. This is why looking outside of Europe for raw materials became the only viable solution. Colonizing what were referred to as backward, underdeveloped, and uncivilized societies was seen as a means of obtaining the wealth richly found in those lands. Therefore, there was a constant flow of raw materials entering into the European states, Britain in particular, fueling and supplying the factories, and as a result, industry began to grow exponentially. The number of factories continued to expand, while, at the same time, however, industrial growth was impeded in the colonies between the 1850s and the 1950s. This was due to the unequal policies of colonial expansion. Regardless of these historical records, industry has grown rapidly, with a tremendous amount of pollution entering the atmosphere, bodies of water, and the ground itself, moving towards ecological unsustainability. Industrialization has had devastating effects on waterways, plant life, natural habitats, and air quality. Although there continues to be those who believe in a sustainable future in which industry and ecological harmony can both exist together, the main root problem does not exist in what some would consider proper governmental and industrial management. These solutions are only sought due to the legacies left behind by colonialism. The question posed are based on how to maintain a viable economic system in the face of ecological ruin, and the point at which the ecosystem may no longer sustain life on Earth. Writers from TerraPass.com, writing about global issues in general, and Rasmi Patnaik, writing about a southern India region, both suggest solutions for sustainability while maintaining an industrial-based economy. Yet, if we carefully look at these articles, we will notice that there continues to be several obstacles which are based on the same forces that drove the Industrial Revolution: financial gain and profit. Without providing an in-depth analysis, what then are the ongoing effects of industrialization on the environment? Looking at waterways, both freshwater, oceans, and surface waters are affected. Water is used in industrial practices and therefore comes in contact with metals, chemicals, or radioactive waste. These in turn along with solid waste disposal creating surface water contamination, are disposed of into rivers and oceans. Several types of metals and chemicals are then circulated within the Earth's waterways, therefore contaminating one of the Earth's most vital resources, drinking water and habitats for marine life, a major source of food supply. In the air, Patnick provided some statistics on deadly toxins that are emitted into the atmosphere. Likewise, Tarapass explains that any physical, biological, or chemical change to the atmosphere is going to have serious effects on air quality. Global warming and climate change are two cited effects of poor air quality management. Emily Folk, a freelance writer and blogger, suggests that more than 80 different toxins can be emitted by industrial pollution and are classified among the worst producers of air pollution worldwide. Poor forestry management also affects air quality by reducing the Earth's ability to reduce levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the land, deforestation, along with the effects due to water supplies, affect both plant life and animals alike. Habitats are being destroyed, terrestrial animal life is forced away from their natural habitats, and food supplies are seriously affected. Waste materials are indiscriminately disposed of with no regard to the effects on the environment, regardless of any governmental controls and regulations. So where do we go from here? Up until now, this has been a very basic sketch outlining the much deeper issues and impacts of industrialization on the environment and the world's ecosystems, but should offer enough insight to get a rudimentary understanding of how destructive industry has been to the sustainability of our planetary home. Therefore, aside from attempts being made to find solutions in which industry and the environment can live together harmoniously, without going to the point of no recourse and of no life on Earth, what are the real solutions most people would not be willing to implement? We will now look at the lifeways of the first peoples to have inhabited the lands which were taken and dominated by European powers. Traditional ecological knowledge and wisdom they possessed and still possess to a greater or lesser degree today, and passed down through many generations for thousands of years prior to European contact.
Indigenous worldview and Western worldview differ dramatically. In the Western worldview, humans and nature are disconnected. We are not a part of nature. Humans are seen to be superior over all other individuals and forces. Nature is there to be used, not as an entity in itself that humans have the good fortune to be allowed to live within. Nature is a commodity to be harnessed and capitalized upon. In the Indigenous worldview, nature is home and the source of all livelihood. Humans are just as much a part of nature as a deer or a tree. We are not separate. Humans are by no means superior to other parts of nature. In fact, animals and plants are seen as kin. Humans with an Indigenous worldview treat animals and plants as wise teachers from whom they can learn many important lessons. Everything is connected and everything has a foundation of respect. Humans are creatures that live within nature as deeply connected brethren, not as conquerors. When a person lives in a community that reveres nature, they grow to see the natural world through a different lens. Walking in the woods, the trees are more than just trees. They are your family. It's a much less lonely way to go through life and much more compassionate. In a healthy family, people treat each other lovingly and respectfully. So, if all of nature is your family, that behavior extends to the trees and the animals and the rivers. You don't dump poison into the river because it's your family. You don't senselessly kill deer because they are your family. When I look at the world through the Indigenous viewpoint, my heart feels full. I feel connected to something powerful and benevolent. When I stop to take a closer look at all the nature around me, a complexity and a beauty is revealed, and even the most unassuming little plant.
We have primarily been looking at one aspect of the accumulative effects of colonial and imperial capitalist empires, These ecological effects are ongoing with no apparent end in sight. By contrast, we will now look at Indigenous lifeways, their legacy, and the footprint they left upon the earth and its sustainability for life and subsistence before contact with Europeans. Although traditional ecological knowledge has been reported and documented in several former colonies, our focus will be on the pre-colonial lifeways of the First Peoples of British Columbia, Canada. British Columbia, as it is now called, is comprised of many distinct First Nations people. Yet respect for all living things is a common thread among Indigenous peoples. All created things, the land, plant life, animals, sea creatures, flying creatures, the cosmos, the people, and any other thing is considered sacred, viewed as a whole, having both life and spirit. The people consider themselves custodians and caretakers of the lands upon which they live. Through thousands of years and many, many generations, an intimate relationship was developed between the inhabitants and the lands. Knowledge of the lands, plant life, terrestrial, migratory habits, marine life patterns, and weather changes, among other areas of knowledge, was and still is passed down through generations by several means. We will now consider just a few of the ways in which sustainability was practiced. Before proceeding, it is first necessary to consider ideas that were constructed by European thought. Ideas such as civilization, primitive, savage, backward, or any other derogatory term that was used to describe First Peoples as inferior to Europeans. All these ideas were and continue to be human constructs and therefore subject to scrutiny. In summary, however, each of these terms were put into use to elevate European ideals as superior to the life ways of Indigenous people. Works from Lenin, Galiano, and Laverie all make mention of the idea of backwardness, which can be summed up as any society of people lacking industry and urbanization, or bluntly, economic expansion. Another good source for further reading by Ayesha Khan can be found at Cosmic Anarchy. However, do these ideas themselves convey any real sense of superiority or advancement? Do they stand up under scrutiny to suggest that Indigenous societies had no structure, no culture, no means of living and sustainability, and, quite frankly, no real sense of livelihood? According to several writers, First Peoples prior to European contact were complex and sophisticated societies. They had culture and art, they had ceremonies and dance rituals, they had complex languages of communication, and various means of conveying knowledge and wisdom, which were passed down most effectively for thousands of years to many, many generations. Most importantly, they had an intimate relationship with everything around them: plant life, animal life, sea life, flying creatures, the land and bodies of water, from rivers to lakes to oceans. All things were considered sacred, valuable, and sustainable, and abundance was never taken for granted or abused for the purpose of personal gain or profit. That is, accumulation and exploitation. When Canada was colonized and cities with factories were erected, the lifeways of First Nations were mostly stripped away from them, and pollution came in place of clean air, clean water, habitats for animals, and thriving conditions for all forms of life. Therefore, let's look at just some of the ways that sustainability, plenty for all, and subsistence was achieved. The first, most obvious thing, without industry and its factories, the air was clean and the waterways were clean. Also, no surface water and ground was contaminated. There were also no diseases which were brought over by European settlers. When trees were used for a variety of applications, they were never completely stripped. This way, they continued to grow and provide. If an entire tree is needed for building homes, often they would wait for it to either die or get blown over by a winter storm. If a tree were cut down, the stump becomes a berry garden. Plants were selectively harvested to allow for continual growth and renewal. Indication of seasons, migrating habits, and the like were known through generations and observation. The habits of animals, including their eating habits, were observed to gain a better understanding of edible foods and better ways to eat certain foods. Pruning and burning was used to enhance long-term productive crops. Also, through observation of birds numbered in an area, flowering of particular plants, the beginning of the first snow and fall, and so forth, are all indicators of when the salmon runs would start. As for being referred to as nomadic people with no settlement patterns, their movements were not aimless. They moved according to seasonal patterns, where food is available at a given time, and also they did have permanent settlements where they would return when it was the right season to settle. They had their own territories according to ancestral custodianship, and the chief of each house was keenly aware of the weather, migration, growth, and other necessary knowledge of that territory to ensure optimal use. Their beliefs were fundamental to the ways in which they made use of the lands, plant life, and creatures to maintain continual growth and renewal. Food was never seen as something to take for granted, and thanks was given to any creature that gave its life and strength to the one feeding from it. Having had a brief introduction to several topics in light of the sustainability of the Earth's resources, it should be clearly understood which practices proved to be superior. The very idea of attempting to integrate traditional ecological knowledge and wisdom into an industrialized state may prove in the long run to be too little, too late, especially since much of the depth and richness of that knowledge may have been lost forever.